for joining us here for this discussion around redistributing the innovation landscape, creating new technology hubs. We're going to take just a couple more seconds to let everyone join the room, and then we will get going in just about 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to kick us off. My name is Ian McClure. I'm the Associate Vice President for Research, Innovation, and Economic Impact at the University of Kentucky. I want to welcome everyone to our U.S. Innovation Competitiveness Summit, co-hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, UK Innovate for the University of Kentucky, Columbia University through Columbia Technology Ventures, and Autumn Global Association for Technology Transfer Professionals. Truly, this has been a really neat collaborative event and discussions throughout the week. And I hope if you were able to participate in our welcome session this morning, it was fantastic and laid the groundwork for the discussions that will happen throughout this week for this event. Today, we have some fantastic speakers to talk about a really interesting topic, redistributing the innovation landscape and creating new regional technology hubs throughout our country for the purpose of competitiveness through innovation. The people that we have on this panel today represent 6 potential technology hubs in our country. And in fact, all 6 of these places that are represented here, Lexington and Louisville, Kentucky, Madison, Wisconsin, Tucson, Arizona, Buffalo, New York, Jackson, Mississippi, all 6 have been identified as a high growth potential region or a top technology hub candidate by esteemed institutions like the Brookings Institution or Jumpstarting America Project. And we have the top of the totem pole from an innovation and research leadership perspective from each of those jurisdictions here, represented through the research institutions in those regions. Our panelists today, I'm going to just very briefly describe who they are, but they're going to describe themselves in more detail here in a minute. We have Dr. Lisa Cassis, Vice President for Research at the University of Kentucky. We have Dr. Kevin Gardner, Executive Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Louisville. We have Christina Orsi, Associate Vice President for Economic Development at the University of Buffalo. We have Omisha Campbell, Associate Vice President at Jackson State University, a premier research HBCU institution in Jackson, Mississippi. We have Elizabeth Cantwell, Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Arizona, and Eric IVerson, the Chief Executive Officer at the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin. So why is today's topic so important? Well, as the development of this summit alone evidences, innovation is squarely at the center of the discussion around national security. This is a sort of an intersection of policy fields that we don't get to address in an alignment the way that we will throughout this week. That's innovation and intellectual property policy and national security policy, as those two are center of discussion now across the country and on Capitol Hill. One of the things the reason we're going to address this new regional technology hub conversation today, of course, the recent passing of the United States Innovation and Competitiveness Act by the Senate in June brought this to the forefront. It was premised by studies like the one by the Brookings Institution in 2019 that proposed a case for growth centers and place-based intervention and investment to intentionally create new technology hubs across our country. So that's all important, but let's put some data and just some anecdotal evidence behind some of this. While the United States has often thought of itself as a leading country for innovation, oftentimes we rely on discussion that centers around our super centers of innovative activity, right? San Francisco, San Jose, San Diego, Boston, Seattle. Those 5 are largely the 5 super centers we talk about. There's some other new ones like Austin and Research Triangle. One of the issues, of course, is that the economies of scale, as recent empirical studies have shown, that are achieved through such concentration of some of that activity and investment, most pointedly, limits the economies of scale become limited because of the widening gap between those super centers and the investment there and the rest of this country that is the majority of our population. As John Hamre, president and CEO of CSIS, very eloquently wrote in his foreword for this event, and if you haven't read it, please go to the website for this event and you can read the entire foreword, but a little excerpt from his writing. He wrote, "America faces two great economic challenges in the coming years. The first concerns ensuring our country's leadership role as a world-class innovator, second to none. There is a second, even more significant challenge. America is bifurcating into two economies. High technology centers have become dynamic and creative, while more conventional economic activity in rural and Rust Belt communities is falling further behind. America cannot succeed if we are to become a divided nation with prosperous professionals living in urban and high-tech hubs and the rest of the country lagging in old industry activities. We know there is innovative capacity in the heartland of America, and it requires intentional investment to equip regional hubs in mid-America to catalyze this resource." Some data behind some of this, most notably in those 5 super centers I mentioned recently: Boston, San Francisco, San Jose, Seattle, and San Diego. Those 5 places accounted for more than 90% of the nation's innovation sector growth between the years of 2005 and 2017. In that fashion, they increased their share of the nation's total innovation employment from 17% to 23%. So 1/4 of our innovation employment in those 5 places. In contrast, the bottom 90% of the other 343 metro areas lost share in innovation employment. And of course, the venture capital follows some of the talent in that activity, right? For example, Midwest universities, although they produce 26% of university patents, they conduct 31% of university research. They graduate 33% of the country's STEM graduates. In the Midwest, the states where those Midwest universities from those stats are housed, had only 98 total venture capital funds, as was published recently by Crunchbase, while New York, Massachusetts, and New York, 3 states, have 1,503. And it's not the number of funds that is perhaps one of the best pieces of data here. It's the fact that of the size of deals, the amount of capital put into similar sized deals at similar maturation points in tech development or startup development, the size of the deals in those 3 states is 12 times the size in those Midwest states. And of course, this is not all just about the Midwest. That's used as an example here. But it's interesting, the tides are turning. There's momentum for greater diversity and inclusiveness in the way that venture capital is being deployed. Last year, for example, 14 states, 14, not just those 3, 14 states saw at least 1.5 billion of venture capital flow into startups that were headquartered in those states. That was up from 10 the year before. So there is some increased diversity of where some of these funds are flowing, and hopefully following some new talent channels. As Steve Case said, and Steve Case will be providing keynote remarks on Thursday this week, if you were able to attend. He calls this, maybe this is currently the shake the snow globe moment, right? So momentum is right. The conversations on Capitol Hill, the venture investments that might be moving in a certain direction. So we do know that localization of innovative industries clustered together does produce more productivity. In those 5 super centers I named recently, as an example, the average innovation industry worker produced more than $100,000 more than the average innovation industry worker that were not in those non-super center regions. But the point being is that if we continue to invest just in those super centers, the consolidation limits the economies of scale. The point being that we need to create more of those potential super centers. So what is a regional technology hub? We're going to talk about that today with the experts we have here, leaders in innovation and research that represent new potential technology hubs. A regional hub, a regional technology hub, as I might premise, and I'm going to get some feedback here from my panelists, is one where more of the technology, has one or more of the key technology focus areas that serve one or more of the priority industries of the U.S., clusters the research, innovation capacity, highly skilled talent, and capital, and creates economies of scale that heighten productivity for the country thereby. So what characteristics do they have? Well, perhaps first and foremost for this conversation is that they have research institutions, high capacity research institutions. We know of the ones, for example, in San Francisco, Stanford, and UC Berkeley, and in Boston, MIT, and Harvard. So that's a core centerpiece of one of these technology hubs. They have to have industry that follows that talent and that research, government and economic development organizations that support them, venture capital formation around them. They have to have those attributes, or at least the capacity to create those attributes. And importantly, we're going to talk about what is a region. Is it just a municipality? Can it be an expanded region? Multiple institutions, multiple states, multiple regions. We'll talk about that as well today. So we have here esteemed research and innovation leaders, as I've said, and we're going to get their thoughts. And first, we're going to have each of them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their current regional innovation hub and the role that they or their institution play in that. And I'm just going to go down the line. I'm going to first just call on our panelists here that I see first in my Brady Bunch line of pictures. So Eric IVerson from Wharf in Madison, Wisconsin. Please kick us off.
Thanks, Ian. I drew the short straw there, but that's okay. I'm happy to take this one on. Thanks for that background. I really appreciate setting both the tone and the context for our conversation. And again, thank you for your invitation for me to join this esteemed panel. I'm Eric IVerson. I'm CEO of what is known as WARF, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. What WARF is we're a supporting organization to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is the flagship university to the University of Wisconsin system. We do service just Madison campus. The rest of the campuses are served by sister organizations that do something very similar to WARF. WARF has been around for about 100 years, not quite, but pretty close. We are independent of the university. We don't report up through the chancellor's office. We're not state employees. And as a result, we're an independent organization with a board and a balance sheet. And over the 100 years, we've been blessed to accumulate a significant amount of assets, both in cash as well as technologies that we're responsible for commercializing. And one thing that we are consistent with is that we subscribe to an idea here called the Wisconsin idea. That is, all activities associated with the university stretch beyond the borders of the campus, well into the entire state. And we're here to service the entire state. I suggest, being a global citizen, that we are here to serve the country and the entire world, quite frankly. What we are able to do by being separate is we are very flexible and we adapt. And so we can use our cash to make venture investments, which we do. We set up a venture fund internally. We do some drug development with the team that we've hired inside of our organization. And we adapt to the changing environment of industries and verticals, wherever they may be geographically. So it's WARF is a wonderful place. I'm not a graduate from University of Wisconsin. I grew up in northern Minnesota and then spent the vast majority of my career out in Seattle and participated in that growth of that hub, if you will, from the early 90s until I left in 2016. So if I kind of move myself into reflecting on a hub, experiencing what Seattle went through, which was enjoyable and quite the experience, but it was very small geographically. Certainly Seattle has Bellevue, the city across Lake Washington from it. We know Microsoft is out in Redmond, but it is very small geographic area. And it made plenty of missteps, like we know so many other hubs have, whether it's traffic has become insane. It has outpriced just about anybody who you need as part of your workforce. The homelessness problems in each one of these is just incredibly insane. And so there's an opportunity that not just an opportunity, but a responsibility that each of us has, those of us on the panel here, as we participate and our players in building our respective hubs, we have a responsibility to attend to those problems that have been the bane of so many of those existing ones. Again, homelessness, lack of affordability, traffic, and those kinds of matters to the extent that we're able to. Madison is a much smaller city than Seattle, but quite frankly, when I moved there in the early 90s, it was a smaller city out in the middle of nowhere. Madison happens to be a smaller city sitting in the Midwest. And so Madison is doing very well in itself, but it also is acting rather insularly of just Madison. And I'll hold comments about what future hubs I suspect will look like, and I hope will look like. But for the moment, Madison is doing well, and it was reflected in the Brookings report as the #1 city ripe for this kind of activity. And they kindly noted that the country needs 10 more Madisons. And I don't disagree with that, but Madison is just simply one city. So those are my thoughts, Ian, so far.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate that. Next, I'm going to go to Dr. Kevin Gardner from the University of Louisville.
Thank you. Appreciate going second instead of first. Thanks, Eric, for that. So my name is Kevin Gardner. I'm the Executive Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Louisville. U of L is an R1 Carnegie engaged research institution with about 22,000 students in the city of Louisville, Kentucky, which is the largest metropolitan region in the state. The metro population is about 1.4 million or so. And the mission of U of L is to be a premier anti-racist metropolitan research university. So I have a few examples of kind of trying to describe our innovation hub. It's a little bit like maybe describing the elephant, but I'll use some examples. But I would say that these are the things to start off with. These are the things that kind of define the innovation hub as it exists today. So one is that we have a university with strong tech transfer engine. And it's not just that we have that engine, but we celebrate that as a university. So we recognize it, we celebrate it, we focus on translational research and prioritize that for our faculty. So there's that culture within the university. We have sufficient local talent in areas of strength, both for the university and its training at all levels, as well as the types of employers in the region, the talent that they have and that they've developed and that they hire and so forth. We have in a few areas these critical ecosystem, critical mass critical mass of companies that provide the co-opetition that you get in these larger areas. We have strong connections nationally and globally, right? We don't exist as some island in wherever Louisville is in Kentucky. I hardly know. I've only been here for a year and a half, and it's been a pandemic the whole time. But anyway, it's not. We work closely with companies and licensees in California and in Europe and so forth. So, and then I would say state and local support. We've got space when a startup needs lab space, when they need clinics, when they need to partner with a university. We have, benefits from a tax perspective in the state, and but these are the same list that anybody would say, and so we also lose out when somebody moves across the river to Indiana or something like that because of the tax or the benefits or whatever it is that they're being wooed away from that perspective. So we have 3 innovation-based industries that are more significant than others: healthcare, logistics and distribution, and advanced manufacturing. So I'm just going to provide these little kind of snapshots. So number 1, Louisville is a global hub for UPS. That makes a difference. University of Louisville has a logistics and distribution institute that crosses multiple colleges in the university. And we have various partnering relationships with UPS around education and development of their workforce. And this is a long history. And so we have a lot of graduates. We have an entire ecosystem of companies in the city and the region that have grown up around this and around the fact that UPS is here and there's good customers and ability to get things out quickly across the world. Just one example, Material Handling Systems Inc. is one company. It's made up of 3 grads from the engineering school. They make, automation, material handling, automation, robotic types of solutions. and they had over $5 billion in sales last year. The Louisville Healthcare CEO Council is founded in order to spur innovation in healthcare broadly speaking. In the Louisville Healthcare CEO Council is made up of 13 companies with over $100 billion in revenue, 2 academic institutions, and while the Healthcare CEO Council partners directly with University of Louisville to support research needs, they also search globally for innovations. And just as one example from last year's search, they brought a new company called Familio, which is a French-based company that has its U.S. headquarters in Louisville now, and was able to attract them because of the density of those companies, because there's a skilled workforce and so forth. And then the last example that I'll provide is that it's more of a wish than it's a little bit more towards the future look, but I would like for our innovation hub to build on the creativity and talent and life experiences of all of the people in the city and the region. And it's just not true with the disparities in education and economic opportunities and so forth that we have. But I feel like this issue that we're really trying to address is the same issue. It's a microcosm of the national issue where we've got pockets of kind of innovation wealth and so forth, and then other parts of the innovation ecosystem that could be great, that could make great contributions, but are limited in their ability to do so. And just one example of that, we received a grant just recently from the Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency for the Louisville Additive Manufacturing Business Development Alliance to innovate, train, and commercialize minority business enterprises in 3D printing technologies. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Next on my screen, I see Betsy Cantwell from the University of Arizona.
Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Given that I get to go third, I think what I'll do is highlight, because there are so many differences in our regions, some of the aspects of the innovation ecosystem and the regionality for the University of Arizona that set us in our region. So we're not only Western, we're Southwestern. We live in Tucson, Arizona, in one of the most arid parts of the United States, and a place that will only get hotter and drier as time goes on. This university was established before Arizona was a state. And so when Arizona was a territory, the University of Arizona was established. And it is a R1 land grant university. We take our land grant mission enormously seriously. And we exist in a state that has only 3 major institutions of higher education. So each of us is actually rather large by many university standards. And so that's sort of historical context. The university itself has over 100-year legacy in things like space science and astronomy and defense research. We have 2 of the largest bases in the US, literally right next door. We are the largest employer in our 1.2 million citizen area, so not small, but this is not a tiny town. This is a good, solid, mid-sized city. The other largest employer is the biggest arm of Raytheon, which is Raytheon Missiles and Space. And yet there are a large number of mid-sized companies, small companies, and now a burgeoning group of startups. So how we got to that, and my job is not only, I'm the Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation, so I own a prodigious amount of acreage in Technology Park, and our tech transfer arm, and our new arm called the Forge, which is really both community-based and university-based to deliver entrepreneurial mindset to our students, our faculty, and our local community. Is to really look at our ecosystem right now, and the places where you will typically, we have and you will typically see for a metropolitan area of our size, challenges are in the investor population. What we have been able to do in the last 5 years in Tucson is bring back to Tucson people who were graduates of the University of Arizona and went off and largely on the West Coast, created their own startups, who want to come back here for a number of reasons and have started really quite viable funds. So we're beginning to build what I call an indigenous investor community. We are not the largest metropolitan area in Arizona, but we are not very far away from the city of Phoenix and Maricopa County, which has about 5/7 of the population of the state of Arizona lives in Maricopa County. When we have developed an investor community there as well, that for us was the hardest component. We have 45,000 students. We graduate an awful lot of people, many of whom wish to stay here. We have worked regionally with our real estate community, as well as our own many different versions of third parties to create incubation spaces of all sorts. We are the entity in the state of Arizona that educates all of our, we have 2 medical schools, one in Phoenix here and one in Tucson here. So our area has for 70 years had this kind of nascent startup community in healthcare, which has really kind of focused down into devices, data, and drug discovery. So we have little ecosystemettes, if you will, there. So all of those components have found a home in Tucson, and that's where we sit today. And I'd love to talk about sort of what does that mean for a region like ours. I think I'll end, Ian, by saying that going back to the land grant mission and encouraging everyone to think along the following lines, we have begun to partner with other Pac-12 land grant universities to look at we have many common problems in the West, many common economic problems in the West. How do we utilize the capacities that exist in all of our extension offices to change the game economically in our Western states? And I'll leave it there. Thanks for the opportunity, Ian.
I love that, Betsy. And that's a really neat segue that I'll defer that segue to later when we talk about what a region looks like and how a region can work together with multiple institutions. All right, next I see on my list, Dr. Lisa Cassis from the University of Kentucky.
Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Yes, and thank you, Ian. I've been serving as the Vice President for Research here at UK since 2014. And I guess I'd start by just introducing our institution by saying we've experienced tremendous growth in grants and contracts here at UK. We've gone up by 81% since 2014 to a record now this year of 468 million. But what's important in that is that we've also been ever increasing things like industry-sponsored contracts, grants that support the infrastructure for technology and innovation, and I'll talk a little bit about that with our Louisville partners. So now I guess on to what my other colleagues have been talking about was what would a hub look like in our region? Well, you know, we, just like Betsy just discussed, we are the land grant flagship institution of higher education for Kentucky. And similar to what I heard from my colleague at Madison, we were in the Brookings Institute as a number 4 ranked city, Lexington and Fayette County. Why were we there? You know, things like we have a high density of STEM talent in our region for places over 300,000. We have the 5th highest number of PhDs per 100,000 people. 34% of our population have a bachelor's degree. We conduct research at a high rate per capita compared to other similarly sized institutions. And another really nice feature about Kentucky is that we're regionally located within 250 miles from 9 other R1 institutions. So we have a nice geographic location that can help us work with partners. So Ian has kept us very busy in his role as Associate Vice President for Research and Innovation at UK. Some of the things that he and all of his colleagues and partners have been doing at our institution that have just ramped up our commercialization and entrepreneurship, like inventions increased by 200%, licenses by 350%, patent applications by 400%, startups by 50%. All of that, I'm sure, contributed to Ian, who is now serving in his role as chair-elect of Autumn. So we are highly represented nationally in research, innovation, and economic development. So our hub, as that land grant flagship institution, has a very heavy partnership with the state, which is another attribute. In this picture behind me and my backdrop, you can see our new Healthy Kentucky Research Building, a $265 million building, of which $128 million came from the Commonwealth of Kentucky in trying times for our state. This particular facility, amongst other things, is serving as the home of biotech innovation across our campus. We also have other interesting interactions with the state, and this is in partnership with the University of Louisville, our other R1 institution in Kentucky, where we have the Kentucky Commercialization Ventures Program, and this is in partnership with the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. And what we do is we provide the infrastructure to build innovation and commercialization at all institutions across our state. We have another partnership with the same Economic Development Cabinet through a program called Launch Blue. And this serves as the state's premier or pre-seed startup accelerator for any startups that are promising across the state. And I guess what we've done is take some of these types of programs and work them into federal grants and contracts, which are quite an interesting model for us. And again, in partnership with the University of Louisville. For example, we have a grant from the National Institutes of Health. We are an EPSCoR state, or the NIH equivalent, an IDEA state. And this particular grant is to lead 25 universities within the Southeast region and help them build the infrastructure for innovation. We also have another NIH-funded grant. It's part of what's called the REACH mechanism, and that's in collaboration with our U of L partners. And that also has a huge emphasis on taking inventions and ideas and seeding them and getting them out into the community. And most recently, I think something we're very, very proud of is that we are co-founding and leading the nation's only accelerator program for HBCU innovators. So we're really working not just within our region, but beyond our borders. And I'd say that we are ready to go, and we are poised and excited to be part of this conversation today. So I want to thank Ian and CSIS and all my colleagues for joining us in the conversation, and I'll stop there.
Thanks, Lisa. Another thing that we heard prominent in your conversation and others is the theme of partnership. And I think we'll certainly explore that from our regions and how that makes a difference. Next, Christina Orsi from the University of Buffalo.
Thanks, Ian. Hi, Christina Orsi. I'm the Associate Vice President for Economic Development, which sits within our Office of Research and Economic Development at the University of Buffalo. Quick overview of UB. We are one of the 64 campuses in the New York State SUNY system. We're the largest amongst all of the New York State SUNY, about 30,000 students, 200 million in annual research, one of the top 40 public research universities, and also interestingly, one of the top in international students, which has been an intentional focus of UB and has been one of our, I think, many great assets, frankly, are the international students that come and stay in our region afterwards. So our innovation hub really has been part of a partnership with our region on developing an economic development strategy that began about 10 years ago, with a focus around really doubling down on growing 3 industry sectors. And it was very intentional to build those around strengths, but also build them in very diverse industry sectors because, Buffalo's history, like many Northeast former industrial corridors, historically we were so concentrated and heavy in industry that when that industry went down, our community just went through really 40 years of really hard times. And so it's been very intentional that we diversify our industry and don't come, while we build on strengths and we have concentrations, we don't over concentrate in just one sector again. So we really built our strategy around, we certainly still had a great base of manufacturing, but focusing it more on enabling especially some of the smaller and mid-sized manufacturers to incorporate technology and innovation into their operations. And that's everything from additive manufacturing to thinking about implementing robotics in their processes to how they use data to improve their efficiencies and enable them to be more competitive in new material applications. So advanced manufacturing, the second sector is really around health and life sciences, where certainly we have a very strong core at the university between, schools of medicine, public health, pharmacy, dental, nursing, but we also have a top cancer research center, Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center, that's a partner of ours. And so we had seen quite a bit of growth in the life sciences sector around both, drug development, diagnostics, and medical devices. And again, continued to kind of double down in how we can enable and facilitate more of that. And then the third was really thinking about what I'll call tech-enabled growth areas, so meaning software tech-enabled. And we have had a strong financial services sector. M&T Bank, I think now the 7th largest bank in the nation. It's headquartered in Buffalo and recently actually announced that their entire tech hub is going to be grown in Buffalo with thousands of jobs. And then we also had one of our first new companies go public, ACV Auctions, which was just formed 5 years ago, went public a year ago, and they're in the marketplace of wholesale online auto trading. So tech-enabled in continuing to support those type of companies is kind of our 3 areas. And then we looked across and said, okay, so what are some of the enabling infrastructure we need to invest in? Just like everyone else has talked about, we needed to build up more of that entrepreneur community. We had very little, venture capital, entrepreneur expertise, incubation support. So the regions made very strategic investments in growing that enabling infrastructure. We also had a huge emphasis on placemaking and smart growth, which maybe was a little different than some of the other communities, because again, Buffalo having gone through a downturn, we lost population for 40 years. And what happened is during that time, the community also spread out and sprawled. So we had all this infrastructure base, but not the population to support it. So we made a very conscious decision that it was also important, in addition to investing in innovation and technology and entrepreneurship, we had to invest in places like our waterfronts, parks, urban cities, to make them a place that especially young people would find attractive to come, stay, live, and grow. And so in the latest census, I'm thrilled to say that for the first time in 50 years, the data shows that we now have population growth. And I think a big part of that is the reinvestment we've made in places and placemaking. And then the third piece of that was really ensuring that we're partnering with not just UB, but there's 30 colleges and universities in our community to have industry-facing workforce development pathways at all levels, to ensure that there's pipelines for people to be able to get the skills they need to get into jobs. So that's kind of the foundation of what our regional innovation hub looks like.
Thanks, Christina. And last but certainly not least, my friend and rock star in innovation, Dr. Amisha Campbell from Jackson State University.
Thank you, Ian. I'm excited to be here, and I'm happy to learn a lot from each of you that's here on the panel. And I would say Ian is a mentor of mine. And as you know, Jackson State University, I'm the assistant vice president for research and economic development at Jackson State University. I've been at the university for 13 years. Spent about 12 of that as director for tech transfer and commercialization. And then, a few years ago, received a call from Tanya Phillips at University of Kentucky about the hub, the regional hub for Accelerate Health that they were working with and submitting to NIH. And as Jackson State is in EBSCO state. We also in Mississippi is also an IDEA state. And so we decided to participate. We didn't know much about what we were getting into, but we thought it was a good challenge for us because we've worked so many years to change the entrepreneurial mindset on our campus and in our community that we're located in, of course, especially in health disparities, one of the biggest areas that we support. And having had the NIH Jackson Hart study for over 20-something years, we wanted to explore more on the innovation side. And so that project with Ian gave us the opportunity to explore biomedical technologies, and during that process was able to get a $11.5 million grant from NIH for our Center for Health Disparities Research. And so working through that with innovation and entrepreneurship in getting that done. And the other great thing that came out of this accelerated health network is the Enrich program, which is engaging researchers and innovators in commercialization at HBCUs. This was something that Ian and I worked very hard on to make sure we establish that and get that across all the HBCUs in our region. We initially started with those that are in the IDEA states, but as we started promoting, we started getting calls from other HBCUs in different states that say, oh, what about us? We have a need for that. And so we continue that program. Has been very successful. It's a pre-accelerator program for healthcare technologies. And what we find is that a lot of the faculty and students come to the process, had no idea about startups or anything like that, or even commercialization. And so we're able to train them and send them back to their different institutions with more knowledge that they can share on their campuses. But more importantly, get them to go on to other programs that they can be successful in and create that pipeline that we can help them through our hub. But also in the state of Mississippi, what we have been doing is working very closely together. So you will see the 4 tech transfer directors from our state institutions, from the University of Southern Mississippi, Mississippi State University, and from Ole Miss, that we work very closely together. I think we text each other more often than we do to our spouses. It's just having that open communication, and people are oftentimes amazed of how close we are and that we're able to have that relationship in order to build the ecosystem that we're working on in the state of Mississippi. So I think we meet, sometimes I tell my boss that they are my bosses because we meet so often, but it's great because we were able to work together with Mississippi Development Authority, Innovate Mississippi, also with our State Institution of Higher Learning, in order for us to craft our science and technology plan. And we decided among ourselves, how are we going to focus? What are we going to focus on in terms of emerging technologies? What do we want to be known as in the state of Mississippi? So it wasn't what Jackson State wanted to do. It wasn't what Ole Miss wanted to do. It wasn't what Southern wanted to do or Mississippi State. It's what the 4 institutions together wanted to do for the state of Mississippi. So we selected 6 emerging technology areas that we thought we all had different expertise in, and we chose advanced materials, autonomy, agriculture, because we have land grant institutions in the state of Mississippi, biomedical and healthcare, data science, as well as sensors and diagnostics. And these are also the areas that we can collaborate in. So if our strength, the Jackson State University, for example, is not in agriculture, then we can also collaborate with Mississippi State or other institutions that have the agriculture. We may be able to use sensors to help in the agricultural field or some other technologies. So we have been working very diligently on this and very intentional, because while we had a relationship prior to us moving in this direction, we're more intentional in creating a more sustainable hub that can not just serve the 4 research institutions, but our regional schools as well, which majority of them are historically Black college and university, just like Jackson State University. So how can we, the 4 tech transfer directors, support all the institutions within the state of Mississippi when it comes to technology transfer and commercialization, because we do have that expertise. I would say with our relationship with the Institution of Higher Learning and supporting what we are doing and working together, we were able to change piece of our legislation known as our smart Business Act which was focused on giving credit to companies that have research projects with our four research institutions. And we have changed that a little bit, not only to provide that type of rebate, but also to provide seed funds for emerging technologies. So the four tech transfer directors are now working together where we can put forward some of these technologies to get seed funding to continue working on their projects, because oftentimes we know in the field that a company may just need $150,000 to make it to the next level. And when that funding is not there, they're not able to be sustainable. And quite frankly, as an HBCU, historically Black college and university, Jackson State does not have the resources or the capacity to do a lot of this, right? And so this type of opportunity, this type of fund will help support some of the things we're working on. And we are very grateful that through what we've been doing with the University of Kentucky has now been given other opportunities by other institutions to partner with them and work through different processes. For example, the Enrich received a lab to market visionary prize for $25K early last year. Time is moving so fast. And we began working on different initiatives as part of that project. Most of it is around diversity and inclusion to ensure that under-resourced institutions like HBCUs and minority-serving institutions are able to get an opportunity to participate in innovation and commercialization. I'm happy to be on the board of Autumn with Ian. Never even dreamt of being on Autumn board, being a member for the past 12 years. But with encouraging words by Ian, I decided to give it a try. And as luck would have it, I was elected to the board, and I'm pleased to serve on the board because that has given me a lot more insight into what's happening, not just nationally, but globally in terms of tech transfer and being able to work with other persons across the UK as well as here in the US to develop a global organization to help with equity and diversity in tech transfer. And so what we're building here in our hub, we're just getting started, but because we have such a strong relationship in the state of Mississippi, I see a lot of potential, a lot of potential in terms of not just what we're doing in the state, but capitalizing on the partnerships that we have, the corporate sponsorships that we have. I would say this, I'm not plugging for HP, but this week we're having HBCU Technology Conference, the first of its kind, led by HP, Microsoft, Intel, and some various other companies that decided to invest in HBCUs, ensuring that we knew what the new technologies were, but also looking at the future of work and also about innovation. And so I'm highly involved with that process, ensuring that our students are part of it so that the entrepreneurial mindset can be developed and different programming to ensure that our faculty and students are engaged in innovation and entrepreneurship. So there's a lot of cool things happening and I'm excited about it.
Thanks, Almisha. I'm excited for you as well. All right, we heard some fantastic things about various hubs and different dynamics across the country. We've got about 30 minutes and I'm going to open up sort of an open conversation here on some important topics that we just heard. One of the first is, what is a region, right? So as we look at regional tech hubs, and one of the interesting dynamics in the discussion on Capitol Hill right now, and it's not to be, I don't think it can be really overstated, the importance of the cooperation, the collaboration that's purported right now between the Department of Commerce and NSF in funding this thing through the USICA Act that was passed in the Senate. And one of the really interesting dynamics is the way that the difference with which both of those, NSF and Department of Commerce, provide their funding via regions and how they define regions. And so I'm going to direct it to Eric first to kick us off. What does the future of a regional technology hub look like? What does that region look like that might be differentiated from sort of current super centers?
Thanks, Ian. And I have to say, it's really impressive to hear each of my colleagues here on the panel speak to what they're doing. It's inspiring. It's really exciting. And I just sincerely appreciate the examples and the stories of what everybody's up to. Madison as I note, University of Wisconsin-Madison, there's not a Wisconsin State University. Certainly we have Marquette. We have a medical college here in the state, but it's the University of Wisconsin system that really dominates the higher education here. And UW-Madison is, as I noted, the flagship, and it is very large. It's $1.2 billion to $1.3 billion a year in research funding. Wharf, we've got a few $1 billion of cash under management and a whole lot of technology that we commercialize. And so it's not a surprise that if Brookings is going to point to something, particularly in Madison, in Wisconsin, it would be Madison. But that sells so much of the rest of the state short, and notably the region short, because I think the Great Lakes itself, from Michigan to Notre Dame, Illinois, and all the other just fantastic universities that are in this region, is the way that I think I appreciate Congress and looking at the way that they're thinking about the country. In our case, I look at everything from Minneapolis down through the 94 corridor into Chicago, which some people refer to as the Badger Belt. And you take the cities just outside of Minneapolis on the Wisconsin side, and of course you run it down through Madison into Milwaukee and into Chicago. It's really a magnificent area of grand research and human capital. But the way that I would see a research hub or economic development hub, sure, it can start in Madison, but it's the southeast corner of this state that has so much to offer. If I look at the only R1 campus in the state is University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, which is significantly smaller, but it's a very powerful university in the context of a city that really has a rich history of manufacturing and other activities. But then you go up north to Green Bay, where of course everybody knows that not everybody's fans, but everybody knows the Green Bay Packers. They have a lot going on up there, and the companies that are around, from autonomous vehicles through advanced manufacturing and other things. And then you just make your way down the Lake Michigan, and you get down to Kenosha, which sits on the border, as you can just pop over to Chicago from there. So I think this geographic area, and I think future hubs have got to be more inclusive, both demographically, certainly with respect to race, gender, age, and otherwise, but then to expand it to be more inclusive from a geographic area and embrace not just the universities, and so many of my colleagues have noted, it's really collaboration among universities, governmental policymakers, as well as industry, and ensuring that you're embracing all humans in that process and not squeezing anybody out, so we can take care of things like traffic and affordability, all of the just so important DEI activities that thankfully the country is beginning to pay greater attention to, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we foster that more and more. So I think regional hubs will be defined and should be defined quite differently from a inclusive perspective. And thanks to our policymakers who are beginning to mandate that really should be part of the equation when we think about it. So that's my perspective, Ian.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I find something really interesting as I look at, for example, that Brookings report that's been cited a number of times in our discussion here, and the fact that they identify San Francisco and San Jose as two different supercenters. And you just talked about sort of collaboration between municipalities. I'm going to direct this real quick to Lisa and Kevin. What Eric just talked about sounds fairly familiar, right? Cities working together and then taking sort of this inclusive approach. And I think that's kind of what we heard from all of us, right? I mean, we all, the word inclusiveness sort of it just resonates with all of us as we talk about our hubs. And I just wanted to see if anyone has a comment to follow up on that.
I'll just add to that. I was thinking through this particular question and thinking about what does it mean, and could a hub be Kentucky, California, and Singapore? I don't know, and why is it, or why is that not? But I think there are some elements that are really important. Density of talent in a certain area, those types of things are really important. I do want to highlight, that what something that Lisa talked about which was the Kentucky Commercialization Ventures that represents all of the institutions of higher education in the state, all the public institutions in the state. And I would say, even further than that, something that we've been intentionally working on is engagement of community members in the ways that, that they've got solutions to problems and innovations and so forth that can be tapped. And it was really interesting to hear Betsy's comment about the way they're doing that in Arizona. So I've got a note to follow up on that. I think that is part of the regional technology hub. Also, it's not just brilliant researchers at universities that have ideas. It's the rest of the entire society that have those valuable ideas.
Thanks, Kevin. Anyone else want to follow up on just the definition of region?
I might add one thought, Ian, because I think about this a lot and that thought is around what's the supply chain for regional, both innovation and regional technology that is regional. So each of us is the supply chain for talent, right? We're the supply chain for ideas, but those have to become something real in our regions one way or another in terms of economic value associated with the whole other aspects of supply chains. And those are also, we know this, very regional, whether it's the materials that are available, or what the distribution and logistics look like, what broadband looks like, et cetera. So I wanted to make sure that we, as we were thinking about regional technology hubs, acknowledge that different regions have different pluses and minuses, if you will, on the other components of supply chain. And those are problems that may need to be addressed as well as sort of the knowledge transmission piece.
Yep, that's a really interesting point, Betsy, because that's one thing that resonates as you look at that USICA bill that passed in June, right? One part of the bill is all about supply chain competitiveness. And one could make the case that this entire potential investment in innovation infrastructure is about supply chain competitiveness. So you have to align the inputs and the outputs of those two. That's really important. I want to direct something to Christina. Christina, you talked in your comments about the investments that you're making there in Buffalo and in your region in infrastructure and place. And so I want to ask a question about why is it so important that this type of an investment, a large game-changing type of an investment, happen in a place like any of our regions here represented? And is the ROI on an investment in Buffalo, for example, different than the ROI on just another investment in Boston, right? And why is that so important?
Right. Thanks, Ian. And I think, in some of your opening remarks, you started to speak to this when you think about the existing, major innovation hubs, right? The handful of them. The density has gotten to be so much that unfortunately what's happened is that it's pricing people out of the markets, right? And the quality of life is going down in those markets. So while they've had tremendous growth and innovation, no one's going to argue with that and how beneficial that's been, but there's been non-sustainable aspects of the growth, too much stress on their infrastructure. So I think part of this looking at locations for the next generation of tech hubs, we have an opportunity to really look at a lot of places where, frankly, there's a lot more opportunities in innovation, but it's maybe not happening at the pace that it could because you don't have the degree of investment in those areas, right? Like we don't have the amount of venture capital. It's concentrated, obviously, in in New York City, or Boston, or Silicon Valley. But everyone here can speak to just some incredible innovations that have come out of their universities or their communities. So we don't have any less quality of innovation. We just haven't had the breadth of infrastructure to enable that innovation to become, get to the market and create jobs in our community. So that's going to require some sort of intervention, from probably public monies to sort of catalyze and close a little bit of that gap where private sector is over-concentrated in some areas, their investment, and, to enable the next, handful of those communities really investing in some public infrastructure. And in a way, the state did this several years ago in New York State, where they invested, it was called the Buffalo Billion. And when I talked about our regional economic development strategy, We had the foundation for that, and then the state invested over $1 billion in those enablers that I talked about, helping us set up seed funds, helping us set up incubators, helping us, set up new workforce pathways, innovation centers. And I absolutely believe that those strategic investments have started to show the data on the impacts that I talked about that we're having now. So, but you need it at scale, right? I mean, that was, a significant investment over a period of years, and you need it in a strategy built around assets. You can't build it from nothing. You have to have strong assets to grow from and be able to kind of double down on. But I would say for our country, we're going to miss major innovation opportunities if we continue to over concentrate in just a handful of areas, because the innovation actually is dispersed. It's just that the supporting infrastructure isn't as dispersed as it needs to be.
Really good comment, Christina. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I talked about there's plenty of evidence of STEM talent, right? I mentioned the percentage of STEM graduates coming out of Midwest universities for the whole country. There's plenty of evidence of innovation coming out of our regions, but there's also plenty of evidence of venture capital follows where those things end up in the end and they go to, right? And I talked about the disparity of the amount of venture capital in Midwest states relative to the amount of STEM talent being produced in those Midwest states. And it's because they flow to the super centers where that consolidation happens. I want to skip to a really interesting question that kind of combines your thoughts with one of my next topics I want to move to, which is the importance of having venture capital or capital around this infrastructure. So the infrastructure is important. And I think we actually all heard here that all of our regions have been investing in some of our infrastructure here, research capacity and things, facilities, places for years, so that we're all sort of ready for this giant this jump that could be coming. Betsy, in your comments, you mentioned some of the venture capital infrastructure. You call it, I think, indigenous capital or something like that. Maybe talk to the importance of having that infrastructure in your region and how that really puts sort of an acceleration on things and why that's needed.
So I'll give you my very personal perspective, because I spent an awful lot of time in Silicon Valley, is that local venture resources, local investment resources are really, really important because they have a very different perspective on risk than any of our other partners. And if they're not local, that risk is not associated with who we are, what we care about, in basically the things that we represent. That risk is taken associated with a whole bunch of measures which may or may not take cognizance of what we need to do in our areas in order to make them more economically strong. So for us, those funds have represented a type of risk that we can't take often, that the state does not wish to take, that established businesses have a hard time taking. Even our best partners, this is a kind of capital risk associated with innovation, driving towards high risk, high reward, which is really, really important in order to go as far as we would like to go in changing the innovation landscape here. And frankly, in creating a community that our graduates want to stay in, because they want to, that is exciting, it's interesting, it's what they're trained to think about, and that's the kind of environment they want to stay in.
Yeah, really good point. Anyone else want to follow up on Betsy's comments about sort of the risk tolerance and the difference between institutions of ours and the risks that we can take? And maybe the risks that we do take every day in research, right? Pursuing basic research concepts every day, but also capital risk, right? In investing. Anyone else want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I would just say that as a state agency, which we are, as a public university in Kentucky, that concept of taking risk is the research risk is one thing, right? We federal funding or even internal funding for looking for the next invention or something like that is very different than the big risk that I think that Betsy was talking about. That was a really interesting perspective.
Yeah. So along the lines of taking risk, or maybe even just teaching taking risk, one of the things that we all heard here is the need for technology transfer infrastructure. And right now, if you were in this morning's session, you heard Walt Koopman talk about the importance of the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980 that allows our universities, our institutions, the performers of this research to also own and manage the transfer of those technologies to public use. Right. And there's tons of stats on the chair-elect of Autumn. Amisha mentioned she's on the board. There's tons of stats that Autumn collects and reports every year about the impact of that work. But Kevin, to you, as we look at the importance of technology transfer to these regional hubs, how important is it? Why is it important, or is it important that sort of we continue to invest, and the federal government continues to think about investing in that technology transfer infrastructure at universities?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I have to say, I think a couple thoughts. Number one is that there's an assumption of magic, that somebody follows their curiosity and bingo, something pops up, and then magically it finds a home in the marketplace, which is not at all the reality of it. So, there's a lot of misconceptions, I think, and even around the ways in which a technology is matured and then licensed, as if it's kind of a handoff, but it's not typically such a handoff. It's much more of a cultivation and a continued partnership. And so we really think about the licensees that we have as our partners, and it requires a lot of care and feeding of those partnerships. So I think it's important to recognize that technology transfer within universities doesn't just happen. And one of the really important roles of technology transfer, and I think Lisa mentioned this in her comments, is changing the culture within a university, celebrating the translational research aspects and what comes from that, the societal impact that comes from that, is a really important thing. I stepped into a culture that has that appreciation here at University of Louisville, but I've been around in enough universities to know it's not something you can just take for granted, and it's not true at all universities that culture exists. So I think that there's a lot that a tech transfer office functionality at a university can do, and I think one of the places that it starts is culture change, providing the education to universities about their role in the economic development, tech-based economic development enterprise and ecosystem, training researchers, training graduate students, postdocs, faculty members about all these processes and how they work and how they don't work. And then I think developing, maintaining relationships between the university, the research community at the university, and the regional innovation ecosystem. Those are really important relationships to have and to build and to maintain. So those are all really important functions. There's all of the additional functions like having a budget to maintain, to protect IP and things like that. That's important for new innovations, having the resources, staff, tools to establish those relationships and build those relationships. But it really is a partnership, and the tech transfer function needs to be that partnership between the university, research enterprise, and the outside world. And that's not a very easy relationship to manage. I'm sure we all have a lot of great stories about, when that's gone really well or when it's not gone really well.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the culture shift of this, Kevin, and why that's important. So we have everyone on this panel oversees to some extent technology transfer and the research impact enterprise within our institutions. But two of us, Amisha and Eric, are both in the thick of it, right? And you guys are doing this on a daily basis to ensure that type of impact. And you both have very different, and what I should say, temporally different points at which your culture shift happened. Eric, with WARF, that was established many years ago, has been well equipped and is a leader in this and has been for years. And so the culture shift you're seeing now, the benefits of that culture shift that happened for University of Wisconsin-Madison a long time ago. And Elmisha, your culture shift is newer, right? Is more recent. You were appointed the first technology transfer leader at your institution in the past decade, and you're seeing the fruits of that right now. So maybe first, Elmisha, since yours is most recent, you can talk about the importance of that culture shift and what it means to your region.
That's a good question, Ian. It's important because, like I said, we've been putting in the work for a while, but you have to be intentional in what you're doing, and you have to understand your limitations, right? So at the historically Black college and university, I've talked about it, about being under-resourced. Not only that, but as you have changing leadership over time, sometimes tech transfer and commercialization is not the focus of the institution. And most institutions are like that, right? So they focus on research, teaching, and service. And even though tech transfer comes on the research, it's not necessarily seen. It's about the money that comes in from research, the faculty getting tenure and promotion. And, in an under-resourced institution like ours, oftentimes faculty would not have the time to engage in innovation and entrepreneurship. They spend most time working on their publication, on their research, because those are the things traditionally that would take them to the path of tenure and promotion. And as you know, Ian, we've been working with PTI for a while now in terms of how do we bring that to our campus where faculty can get credit for engaging in innovation and entrepreneurship. And we see that some of our institutions have adopted that very early, but some of us are still struggling because it's new. So one of the things I found that is very helpful is getting the junior faculty as they come in, not giving them enough time to immerse themselves in the culture that's already there. So almost you have to become almost like a mentor to those junior faculty and getting them involved in the training, into the commercialization programs very early on before they realize I'm not going to get credit for this right now, because then it becomes more difficult to convince them because they have high teaching loads and they have a focus that they have to do for tenure and promotion and a time frame in which to get that done. So it's exciting to see that the shift is now happening. It took a long time. Like I said, I've been here 13 years doing this for almost 12. And to see it now coming into fruition, where now I have a leadership that says, okay, we get it, right? And a provost that said immediately, we're going to put this a part of our tenure and promotion package where now faculty can get credit for engaging in innovation and entrepreneurship. Of course, what our credit looks like would be different to what a University of Kentucky looks like, maybe different to what an Oregon State look like, but at least it's there in some capacity that they can get credit. And I can convince them a little bit more now to engage in the process. Some of the challenges, like I said in the past, was more so, we don't have a deep bench of faculty and staff to work with. I've been a one-person tech transfer office for 12 years. But the good thing about it is have partnerships external to our institutions that have been very helpful in moving this forward, not only for the Mississippi Research Consortium members in our states, but universities like Kentucky, Georgia Tech, and some others who have embraced Jackson State and work with us to ensure that we can build that capacity on campus. And so that's when we are seeing it. So I'm not worried about the past 12 years. I'm worried about the future and what we can do now that we have this access that's before us.
Right. And so to great points. And now to Eric, you all made this investment in Madison a long time ago, and certainly you've seen the impact on your region now, right? Maybe speak to just sort of what that means. What does WRF mean to your region? Certainly a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But first comment, Elmisha is awesome. I really enjoy hearing her comments, and it really also resonates. There are a lot more parallels between her organization and mine, and I suggest pretty much everybody's, than we might think. And that is, sure, from a resource perspective, WRF stands alone from most others. I'm guessing most tech transfer offices don't have $3.5 billion and thousands of technologies and venture funds. I have the luxury of grand assets, but at the end of the day, I'm a transient steward of these assets my job is to ensure that we're around for another 100 years, and I'm going to be handing this off to my successor in due course. So my job is to far more than not screw things up. My job is to set course in a way that I believe the course should be set, and thankfully, my trustees and the campus have bought into it so far, are very, very supportive. But it also means that through these 100 years, we have very entrenched bureaucracies, very entrenched faculty who really could care less about translational activities, and quite frankly, very, very, very few have any proclivity to be an entrepreneur. Some do, most anyway should not, even if they want to. And so it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we are acting in a way that industry and the policymakers feel they can play along with, because I don't have to do what other people say, but I have to do things that they want to participate in. And unless we do that, then we are losing an opportunity to embrace far more people and organizations and cultures to be able to do a better job and to build the organizations that we're each responsible for running. But those entrenched bureaucracies certainly, I have no misconceptions that I'm going to change a culture at a university. That's just silliness. But what you try to do is find the select champions who really do feel it's important to develop inventions, to seek patent coverage to the extent it's patentable. To the extent it's not, it's my job to help figure out how to get those things commercialized. Software, for example, is a speed to market issue, not a patentability issue. So it's a lot of the things that Almisha noted are very similar to the things that we at Wharf and University of Wisconsin are grappling with. So we can all learn from each other, and we all should learn from each other on an ongoing basis, that's for sure.
Yeah, yep, fantastic comments. I love this conversation. I want to direct my next question here to Lisa. What we just heard is sort of anecdotally, but also expressed case studies of the impact that institutions and culture shift within those institutions have had on a region. We know that as sort of eligible consortia is defined, and for example, in the USEEC Act that was passed in the Senate in June, that consortia must include research institutions, but also can include local governments, economic development organizations. But I think importantly, the center of every conversation that I've had around USEEC is the need to involve centrally a research institution, right? At these hubs to perform the work, to help lead the work. And so maybe talk a little bit, Lisa, about the importance of having a research institution like any of ours here at the center of what could be an investment to be a new regional tech hub, and why that's critical, because everything we've talked about, the outputs of everything we've talked about flows either from, incubated from, or flows through a university. Is that right?
Yeah, Ian, and I have to agree with Eric. Almisha, you're amazing. I'm learning a lot listening to you too. I think this is kind of an easy question. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here of universities being a driver of regional innovation. We are obviously, we train, and I heard this, we train the STEM talent. I mean, we are that supply chain for the STEM talent. We just talked about the tech transfer. We all have the infrastructure to support that at our institutions. We know how to help people with startup companies. It's not just a required part of our academic mission. It's really, I guess, part of our DNA to be drivers of innovation. And I think, as I heard from someone else talk about, as a public institution, and as I mentioned, we're pretty heavily engaged in being state partners. In our state, we are bona fide agents of the states in many ways to provide services. As that land grant university, we have these extension offices in every county across the region, and all of us are geared at the same thing, and that's stimulating the economy by partnership with state and industry and others. So, I guess another thing I would bring up here of the role of a university plays is that, we follow the question, right? We follow the question where we don't have the persuasion or other influences that might exist in the private sector. We go after it in whatever form and output that the talent can do. So we are, I guess I would call untethered partners, and that makes us attractive and well-suited to drive innovation. And I'll give you an example of our university. So we are 17 colleges, including 6 healthcare colleges, all on one campus, 1 mile from the city center. And we pride ourselves on collaboration. So we go beyond boundaries of discipline, both within and external to the university, to tell people, think outside the box, come up with something that's different and new. So we're really kind of structured intellectually in being the drivers. So I guess those are my basic thoughts. I could go on for an hour about why universities are well positioned to be leads in these hubs or to be integral partners. And I'll let some of my colleagues speak, but those are the things that come first and foremost to my mind.
Thanks, Lisa. So we have 10 minutes left, and I want to give each of us 1 to 2 minutes very succinctly to describe, based on everything we've discussed today, what a future tech hub might look like, and what are the policy, maybe the single policy that you think is most important, right, to instill in any kind of investment or enactment of legislation that might help create some of that intentional investment. What might that be, and what impact might that have on the future of your hub that you're at the center of? I'll start with Christina. She gets the privilege of going first here.
Great, thanks, Ian. So I think, I already talked about the current tech hub. So, I do think it's all around tech-enabled industry sectors in these public-private partnerships, which I think any of the legislation, even some of the earlier things, EDI has just put out their Build Back Better, and it's all looking at public-private partnerships, innovation, entrepreneurship, and the other theme that I think we've all talked about that is much needed and has to run through the funding is equity. Each of us should be in our plans and through these tech hubs thinking about how we truly advance equity in our communities and build more inclusive pathways. And that is going to require us working very differently, building different partnerships than maybe historically we've had, bringing in community-based organizations, reaching out differently. So to me, the innovation hubs have those still cores that we all talked about in some of our strengths. But the piece that we're all going to have to lean in on, I think, a little bit more, and a lot of us, have programs that have begun to start to build that, but probably really lean in a lot more on intentionally building a more inclusive innovation economy.
Thanks, Christina. Agreed. Betsy.
So here to everything that Christina said, there isn't an element of what you said, Christina, that I wouldn't have said myself and completely agree with. So just to sort of hang off of that a little bit, as a person who has done an awful lot of studying of organizational design, the nation has a number of examples of large-scale research hub creation that have worked to better or lesser extents. And they should be examined at some level. The manufacturing institutes are a great example where there are a lot of lessons learned from those, and an awful lot of money has been expended. FFRDCs in general, they're often regional hubs. They have pluses and minuses. For me, the one thing I would add is that in any construct that really gets created to scale our capacity to serve the rest of the country, that's not the coasts, is to really understand how to create economic value. And that is the heart of what sort of the diversity issue really is. And making sure that instead of focusing just on kind of what's innovation or even what is the infrastructure around that, how do we know we're making a difference to economies?
I love that. Thanks, Betsy. Almisha, the person we all agree is awesome. You're up next.
Thank you, Ian. Of course, I'm going to say it has to be equitable, must be inclusive, it must be diverse. And especially here in the state of Mississippi, it has to include public-private partnership. It must include our state development authority. It must include our institution of higher learning, and it must include our community colleges, because they're doing a lot of workforce development. They're doing a lot of stuff that we are not able to do at our institutions. And so that partnership with them and with other entities within the state is very critical for us in order to build this technology hub and make sure that it's sustainable. And so we also have to create that pipeline. We have to engage our students at a very young age. I firmly believe that we have to start as far back as the K-12 program in infusing innovation and entrepreneurship in our young minds, so that by the time they get to college, they would already have that ingrained in their systems, so that it becomes easier for them to participate in the process. I think this is one of the ways that we can do that. It also has to work. We also have to work on, especially in the state of Mississippi, that we know we have a brain drain problem. We have to develop programming and opportunities for some of our people to stay in the state, right? We have to keep them in the state, for them to invest in the state, for them to work in the state, because they are our talent. We're building a knowledge-based economy, and in order to do that, we have to ensure that we keep the talent in the state.
Thanks, Amisha. That's really fantastic. All right, Lisa, you are next.
Well, I think I'm running out. They've done such a good job. I would say, to just emphasize regional. I mean, we have to have regional investment. We've all on this panel have been able to speak to why what's coming out of our institutions and our areas. That is so critically important. And I think we also heard the matching our innovation to our region, where we can have that impact, is vitally important. So that's another reason why the regionality to me is absolutely critical, because otherwise, all the different issues and areas of innovation that are important to us within our areas may not be the same thing that are on either coast. And so we really have to have that ability to bring our best ideas forward. And I think we're all shown today that we're really well poised to do that and ready for whatever mechanism comes our way. So I also agree, diversity and inclusiveness in everything that we do has been, as you heard, an underlying foundation of Kentucky's approach. And I think we just have to continue to build that as we move forward. And I thank you again for letting me be part of this.
Thanks, Lisa. Kevin.
I'll make 3 quick points. So and most of this is restating what other ideas other people have offered. One is that it's important to have collaboration among all institutions and have the humility to engage with community organizations and others that have important pieces of the puzzle to put together. I think it's important that while we have a regional organization, which is so important, as Lisa just said, making a national, international, having those national relationships, international relationships, and making that national impact, economic impact, as Betsy said, I think is critical. And then I think that we need a hub that has the ability to be nimble and agile and ability to change and be responsive to all the voices in the community, which is something that struck me when Eric was making some of his comments.
Thanks, Kevin. And Eric.
Yeah, thank you. 3 words come to my mind: collaborative, inclusive, and focused. Collaborative to me is policymakers, universities, and industry have got to figure out a common vision and set of goals that they want to accomplish. One example of that would be in Massachusetts, with the state putting up original monies for Kendall Square, and creating the incubators that are on and around Kendall Square that are associated with MIT and Harvard, of course, with industry pulling a lot of new companies and workforce out of that. So I think collaborative, policymakers, university, industry. On the inclusive, that has to be both demographic and geographic. We have to broaden out hubs than just cities. It has to be quite broad, and people have spoken to the demographic aspect of that. It can't be overstated, but how critically important that is. Focused, then the third word is none of us can be all things to all people. And we have certain expertise If there are technologies here coming out of the University of Wisconsin, all of us are subject to whatever comes in the door, we got to attend to, from agriculture to engineering to life sciences to you name it. But if there's something that really Madison or this geographic area is not good at developing, it should be licensed to somebody in, whether it's Silicon Valley or down in Louisiana or whether it's Mumbai, India. I don't care. It should be developed where it has the best chance to be developed and have impact on society and this earth. So I think collaboration, inclusiveness, and being focused are what's going to be really important, I believe, for strong technology hubs in the future.
Thanks, Eric. And thanks everyone on the panel. Fantastic comments. I love that ending piece: collaboration, inclusiveness, and focus. These are the comments for over the last hour and a half from what represents almost $3 billion in research per year. That is almost 40% of the annual budget of the NSF. So these are important comments, and I hope everyone who listens to them takes heed and understands the importance of what we're saying and redistributing the innovation landscape, investing in new regional technology hubs, and importantly, the policies that will make them impactful. Thanks to the CSIS, Columbia University, and Autumn for joining UK Innovate at the University of Kentucky for hosting this summit. More amazing conversations coming up tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. I hope that others will attend them. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great one.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.